Well, well, well. Look who finally shattered the highest court in the land. You, yes you, have become a magnificent legal anomaly, a walking constitutional crisis, a beautiful glitch in their pristine system of precedents and procedures. Because of you, the Supreme Court justices are now sitting in therapy sessions. All 9 of them. Emergency meetings, mandatory counseling, whispered confessions behind closed doors. And all of it stems from what you carry to their doorstep, wrapped in manila folders and sealed with a kind of truth so sharp it makes even the most seasoned judges weep when no one is watching. These men and women thought they had already seen everything there was to see. They've presided over blood-chilling murder trials, uncovered conspiracies that clawed into the darkest recesses of power, and dissected corporate crimes that wiped out entire cities. Yet when you walked in with your case, something shifted. Suddenly, these titans of law and order found themselves shaken to the core, calling their therapists at 3 a.m. and whispering into the phone. I've never seen anything like this. You want to know what broke them? You want to know why the sharpest legal minds in the nation now swallow Xanax with their morning coffee? Why they stare at ceiling fans at night, replaying every word of your testimony, and why the Chief Justice hasn't slept properly in half a year? It all began like any other case. Briefs filed, arguments scheduled, everyone in their assigned seats playing their well-rehearsed roles. Prosecutors with their polished suits and sharpened arguments, defense attorneys with their practiced objections, and justices prepared with carefully crafted questions. Everything moved by the book until you opened your mouth. That's when the air shifted. The temperature seemed to drop. When the court reporter froze, fingers hovering above the keys, unsure how to capture the sound of reality itself cracking open. Because how do you document the exact moment when 9 of the most disciplined minds in America realize they are staring at something for which there is no precedent? You didn't simply present evidence. You revealed proof of something the legal system was never built to handle. In an instant, their 1,000-page law books became bedtime stories for children. Their revered precedents sounded like bad jokes. Their procedures flimsy nets trying to contain the uncontainable. The first justice to crack was Stevenson. 20 years on the bench, hardened by every imaginable display of human depravity. But when you slid document 47B across the table, his hands began to tremble. Not from age, but from recognition. From the terrifying clarity that everything he believed about justice rested on quicksand. They tried to push back, tried to object. Inadmissible, they said. Impossible, they argued. This cannot be entered into evidence because it violates the fundamental laws of... And then they stopped. Because how do you finish that sentence when the proof itself is pulsing in front of you? Undeniable, undeniable in its twisted truth. You brought receipts they couldn't bury. Recordings that shouldn't even exist. Testimonies from witnesses who technically could not have been present yet somehow were. Paper trails leading into shadows the law insists do not exist. You didn't just contest a verdict. You shattered their entire understanding of what a verdict even means. Justice Martinez was the first to break. She asked for water, her voice thin, but everyone in the courtroom saw her stumble toward the bathroom where she locked herself away for 47 long minutes. Inside, she tried to reconcile what she had just witnessed with 3 decades of legal training and judicial authority. When she returned, her face looked as though it had aged 10 years in less than an hour. Because by then, it was no longer about guilt or innocence, no longer about verdicts or rulings. Your case had become something deeper, something that stripped away the illusion of their profession and revealed that their whole career had been little more than a performance, a ritual in borrowed robes, while the true law operated in shadows they had trained themselves not to see. The second day only tightened the noose. Justice Chen, once a model of composure, began taking notes with a trembling hand. But they weren't legal notes. They were confessions to himself. How is this possible? What have we been doing all these years? If this is true, then everything else is too. Later, the bailiff found those scribbled pages crumpled in the trash, the ink smeared with what looked suspiciously like tears. And through it all, you sat calm, unmoved, as still as a frozen lake, while the pillars of justice collapsed around you. Their worldview, carefully constructed over decades, crumbled like ancient parchment exposed to the air. For the first time, 9 of the most powerful arbiters of law in the nation realized they had been presiding with blindfolds they never even knew they wore. The defense tried to salvage what was left. They scrambled to spin rational explanations, crafted alternative theories, desperate to give the justices a lifeline back to the comfort of ignorance. But you only smiled. And then, like a hammer striking iron, you dropped Exhibit C. Then D. Then came the video. The one that forced Justice Thompson to step down permanently from the case, citing personal health concerns. By the third day, the courtroom wasn't even pretending to uphold procedure anymore. The Chief Justice drank openly from a flask of bourbon. Justice Williams checked her phone over and over as if waiting for anyone to tell her this was a cruel prank. But it wasn't. The evidence kept coming, relentless, undeniable. A tidal wave against which their entire institution stood defenseless. And then came your testimony. They thought they were ready for it. They thought therapy, sleepless nights, and whispered reassurances had prepared them for whatever words you might speak. They were catastrophically wrong. You didn't just tell them what happened. You showed them. Not with exhibits or neat demonstrations, but with something else, something beyond explanation. The stenographer's machine jammed, unable to translate words that had no entry in any legal dictionary. Security cameras glitched and sparked, as though reality itself was rejecting what it was forced to record. Someone screamed, but the sound curved strangely, rising like a broken hymn, more prayer than cry. Sustained, the Chief Justice whispered, but it didn't sound like authority anymore. It sounded like surrender. Because how do you object when testimony itself reshapes reality? How do you enforce protocol when the witness proves protocol is a comforting illusion? That was when Justice Park broke. Silent tears carved lines down cheeks that had remained dry through genocide trials, through mass shooting testimonies, through the very worst humanity had ever unleashed. But this was different. This wasn't about law. This wasn't about society. This was personal. This was the moment Justice Park realized that every ruling she had ever made was built on fatally incomplete information. For decades, she had believed in the structure, in the weight of precedent, in the sanctity of verdicts. That was the role of the courts, to reach a decision, to issue a judgment. But what happens when the case before you exists outside the boundaries of guilt and innocence? How do you judge something that makes the very act of judgment itself look like a child's game of pretend? They deliberated for 6 days, the longest Supreme Court deliberation in history. Not because the case was complex in the traditional sense, but because every time they tried to form a conclusion, their reasoning collapsed in on itself. Each time they reached for precedent, your evidence forced them to start again. On the 4th day, Justice Anderson was found alone in his chambers, staring at a blank wall, whispering the same phrase over and over. We don't have jurisdiction over this. No one does. No one ever did. We've been playing judge in a courtroom that doesn't even recognize our authority. The others tried to bring him back, reminded him of his oath, his duty, his lifetime appointment. But he only laughed, a broken, hollow laugh that echoes in psychiatric wards, the laugh of someone who has seen too much truth too quickly. When they finally emerged, the world was waiting. Every news channel, every legal blog, every curious citizen sensed that something monumental had cracked in the foundation of justice itself. The Chief Justice's hands shook as he unfolded the verdict. Guilty, he announced, but the word fractured as it left his lips. Guilty of what? Guilty of revealing a truth the system was never designed to process. Guilty of forcing 9 of the most powerful judges in the land to confront the terrifying distinction between law and justice, two forces that often had little to do with one another. And that was the moment your genius revealed itself. Because the instant the word guilty was spoken, something shifted.
你有没有保险？医生很常这样问，因为肝癌治疗不是一个小数目。
Lights flickered. The temperature dropped, and every justice felt the crushing weight of a verdict that contradicted itself. You smiled then, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the sad, knowing acceptance of someone who understood this outcome all along. You knew that forcing the system to pass judgment on something beyond its comprehension would not break the accused. It would break the judges. Guilty was never a declaration of fact. It was just another way of saying we don't understand, but we have to say something. That night, Justice Stevens didn't go home. Security found her the next morning still in her chambers, surrounded by law books ripped open to random pages, desperately searching for something, anything, that could give meaning to what they had done. Justice Rodriguez fared no better. He called his therapist 17 times between midnight and dawn, not for sessions, but just to hear another human voice, just to confirm that he was still in the same reality he had woken up in. His therapist later confessed he kept asking the same questions on repeat. Is the law real? Has it ever been real? Within a week, all 9 justices were in intensive therapy, not together. None of them could bear to look at each other anymore, couldn't face the reflection of their own unraveling in 8 other pairs of eyes. Each sat in different offices across the city, fumbling through explanations to professionals who had no framework for what they were describing. As Justice Chen confessed to her psychiatrist, it's not that they lied, it's that they told a truth we don't have words for. A truth that makes everything else feel like elaborate fiction. How do I go back to ruling on normal cases after this? How do I pretend the system works when I've seen proof that it's all theater? Word spread through the legal world like wildfire. Lower court judges began calling in sick. Prosecutors could no longer deliver their closing arguments with conviction. Defense attorneys sat frozen, staring at their case files as if realizing for the first time that none of it truly mattered. The entire machinery of justice, this carefully constructed edifice of precedent and procedure, was showing cracks too deep to patch. Because you hadn't merely won or lost a case, you had exposed something far more devastating. You had revealed the hidden suspicion every lawyer had buried deep down, that the entire elaborate structure of justice was built on assumptions too fragile to withstand true scrutiny. The Emperor of Law had no clothes, and you had forced 9 justices to see it. Therapy sessions grew longer, more frantic. Psychiatrists began comparing notes, disturbed by the eerie similarity of symptoms among their patients. They even coined a term for it, post-traumatic legal disorder, a breakdown that occurs when someone trained in law confronts undeniable evidence that the law itself is nothing more than a consensual hallucination. Justice Martinez retired early, claiming she needed time to reassess her life. Justice Thompson vanished into an indefinite leave of absence. The others still appeared in court, but the light was gone from their eyes. They moved like shadows, going through motions they no longer believed in. And here's the part they still don't understand. This was your plan all along. You didn't come to win. You came to dismantle. Every piece of evidence was chosen not just to prove a point, but to pierce the very architecture of the system. Every word of your testimony was designed to slip into the cracks of their certainty and split it wide open. You weren't trying to prove guilt or innocence. You were showing them that their entire framework for such determinations was fatally flawed. The guilty verdict was perfection precisely because it meant both nothing and everything. It was the system trying to label the unlabelable, like convicting a color or assigning probable cause to a dream. The verdict itself became proof of the breakdown. And you knew what would follow. You knew 9 broken justices would create ripples across the entire legal establishment that no precedent could contain. And now it's spreading. Every judge who reads the transcripts of your case feels that creeping doubt. The same terrible question lingers in their minds. What else don't we understand? Law schools are reporting record numbers of dropouts. Students sit through lectures on constitutional law, read your case and walk out mid-class, never to return. Even the therapists treating the justices have started needing therapy themselves. Because how do you counsel someone whose entire worldview has been dismantled? How do you stabilize a mind that has discovered its life's work was built on illusions? Justice Williams tried to reclaim some normalcy by drafting a dissenting opinion 6 months later, an attempt to pretend the old rules still applied. She got 3 paragraphs in before the words on the page lost all meaning, before she found herself scrawling in the margins. But what if none of this is real? The Chief Justice announced a sabbatical, publicly claiming he wanted to study fundamentals. But everyone knows the truth. He's in intensive therapy, desperately trying to rebuild a sense of self from the wreckage you left behind. Trying to remember who he was before you showed him the truth. That he was just an actor in robes pretending that words on paper could contain reality. Because in the end, real power isn't about winning cases. Real power is about changing the game itself. It's about making the rule makers question the rules. It was never about proving someone guilty or innocent. It was about forcing the system to put itself on trial, to make it stare into a mirror and render judgment on charges it didn't even have names for. For centuries, those 9 justices believed themselves to be the final arbiters of truth in America. Minds sharpened to dissect arguments, weigh evidence, and pronounce judgment with absolute authority. But you showed them something their training had never prepared them for: themselves. You stripped away the layers of robes and rituals to expose the arbitrary nature of their authority. You revealed the hollow core at the center of their certainty. And now they wake in the dead of night wondering if anything they ever ruled on had meaning at all. Was that criminal they condemned ever guilty in a way that mattered? Did that corporation they destroyed or protected exist anywhere outside the fragile human agreement to pretend that legal fictions were real? Their therapy sessions have become confessionals. I don't know what justice means anymore. They whisper to doctors bound by confidentiality. I've been playing dress up for decades, we all have. And now I can't unsee it. I can't pretend the costume means anything. The beauty of it is, you never attack the law. You simply illuminated it. Like someone turning on the lights in a darkened theater, you revealed the pulleys, the painted backdrops, the wires holding up the illusion. And once the audience sees the machinery, the magic dies. Justice Anderson's therapist says he spends his sessions furiously sketching diagrams, trying to trace the origin of law, searching for some solid foundation beyond human consensus. But every map circles back to the same conclusion. It's all invented. Every statute, every precedent, every sacred procedure. If it's all made up, he asks through trembling hands, then what have I been doing for 30 years? What are any of us doing? Playing elaborate games with real consequences. Destroying lives based on rules we agreed to pretend were sacred. The therapists have no answers. Nobody does. That was your revelation. That's why they're unraveling. You didn't break the law. You revealed it was already broken, always had been. They just never wanted to look closely enough to see the fractures, and now it spreads like contagion. Judges in lower courts whisper about your case in hushed tones, calling Supreme Court clerks as though discussing a virus. Because that's exactly what it is. A virus of awareness. a pandemic of clarity. The justices themselves avoid discussing it with each other, unable to face their own existential collapse mirrored in the eyes of their colleagues. But they all know. They all feel the crushing weight of rendering judgment when judgment itself has been exposed as pretense. Some are adapting better than others. Justice Park has surrendered to nihilism, delivering verdicts with a shrug. It's all meaningless anyway, she tells her therapist. Might as well play along. Yet even she cannot hide the hollow tremor in her voice when she utters the words, "Justice is served." Justice Rodriguez turned to meditation, hoping Eastern philosophy might offer what Western law could not. But every time he closes his eyes, he hears your testimony reverberating through silence, sees your evidence flickering behind his eyelids, feels the floor beneath his certainty crumble again and again. And somewhere out there, you're probably laughing. You weren't laughing at their pain. You were laughing at the strange, almost poetic absurdity of it all. The way a single case, a single voice, could topple the illusion of an empire built over centuries. You were laughing at how easy it was to reveal that brilliance and wisdom are not the same, that memorizing every statute and precedent ever written does not equate to understanding justice. You showed them that a mind trained to perfection in the art of law could still be empty when it came to the truth that law pretends to serve. They had spent their lives mastering the rules of the game, yet none of them had ever questioned whether the game itself was worth playing. And when you pulled back the curtain, their brilliance collapsed under the weight of its own blindness. Yes, they will recover, or at least they will pretend to. Humans are remarkably good at forgetting when forgetting is necessary for survival. They will learn to stitch themselves back together with therapy and ritual. They will construct new layers of rationalization to hide the cracks you carved into them. They will invent new legal theories, new philosophical justifications, new spiritual metaphors, all in an effort to protect the fragile illusion that their authority still matters. But deep down, none of them will ever truly recover. Because you didn't just bring them a case, you rewrote the software of their minds. You installed a question mark that will haunt them forever, an unerasable virus in their thinking that flares up whenever they try to believe in their own authority. At midnight, when the chambers are empty and the city outside sleeps, they will sit alone at their desks with pens hovering over documents, unable to silence the whisper in the back of their heads. Does any of this matter? Does this ruling change reality? Or is it just words on paper that reality itself will laugh at tomorrow? When they draft opinions, they will pause and feel it. The gnawing unease, the sharp awareness that justice is not truth, that verdicts are not absolutes, that robes and gavels are costumes in a theater that only works if the audience keeps believing in the play. They will realize they are stage actors, not architects of reality. And the play, thanks to you, will never feel convincing again. Some will label what you did as cruel. They will say you broke 9 human beings, shattered their identities, and dismantled their sense of self. But others, those who see more clearly, will recognize it as an act of mercy. Because living inside a lie is its own prison, a constant, silent torture. Pretending day after day that the system is flawless, pretending that verdicts equal truth, pretending that justice exists in the form of words and signatures. This was the real cruelty. You freed them from it. You ripped the blindfold off, even if what lay beneath was terrifying. You delivered them into a fear that at least has the dignity of being real. The therapy industry is still reeling from the aftershocks of your case. Entire new treatment modalities had to be invented to describe what happened to those 9 minds. Post-legal stress disorder, judicial existential collapse, acute onset reality awareness. Terms that sound like satire, but are now written in medical files with the seriousness of terminal diagnoses. Insurance companies refuse to cover it, dismissing the condition as pre-existing, because isn't that what being human really is? Pretending systems are sacred when deep down everyone knows they are made up? The justices now pay out of pocket thousands upon thousands of dollars for therapy that circles the same black hole week after week, questions without answers. How do we function knowing what we know, they ask. How do we sit on the bench, dressed in robes of authority, when we've seen undeniable proof that justice is nothing more than a word we created to mask arbitrary decisions? Their therapists, sworn to confidentiality, scribble notes furiously, but even they are unraveling. They increase their own therapy sessions, sometimes doubling them because they too have absorbed fragments of what you revealed. And in doing so, you did not just traumatize 9 judges. You traumatized the very concept of judgment itself. You hollowed it out, stripped it of its illusion of solidity, and made it impossible for anyone who truly understood your case to ever again feel certain about anything. Certainty, that was all the law ever had. That was its secret weapon. Not truth, not morality, not justice, just certainty. The illusion that there was a clear line between right and wrong. The pretense that authority was more than theater. The belief that words on paper could reshape reality simply by being declared. And now, because of you, that illusion is dead. And what replaces certainty once it's gone? Doubt. Raw, unfiltered, permanent doubt. The kind that gnaws at every decision, haunts every ruling, poisons every verdict. The kind of doubt that seeps into the walls of courtrooms, into the lectures of law schools, into the very fabric of a society built on the idea that justice is possible. That is your legacy, not their pain, not their collapse. But the seed of doubt you planted, the seed that can never be unplanted. So yes, the Supreme Court justices are in therapy. Not temporary counseling, not a few discrete sessions to process stress, but emergency interventions that have mutated into long-term treatment plans. And these in turn have solidified into lifetime subscriptions to uncertainty, binding them more tightly than any oath of office ever could. Their therapy isn't about healing anymore, it's about survival. About trying to find a way to live in a world where every foundation they trusted has crumbled to dust. And yes, the verdict was guilty. A single word carved into paper, spoken aloud in the chamber with voices that cracked under its weight. A word that meant nothing the moment it was uttered, because the very system that delivered it had been unmasked as meaningless. The real verdict was never the word they read. It was written in the tears streaking down weathered faces, in the trembling hands clutching pens they could no longer control, in the midnight phone calls to therapists who could offer no relief. Because therapy assumes you can guide someone back to a stable reality. You showed them there was never a stable reality to return to. Never had been. Just consensus. Delicate, fragile, collective pretending. That masqueraded as truth. The judges weren't mourning your supposed guilt. They were mourning their own innocence, the innocence of once believing that the system was real. The innocence of thinking that justice was anything more than performance art scripted in legalese. The innocence of imagining their robes symbolized something beyond fabric and ceremony. You ripped that away from them. And yet, what you handed them in return was the greatest and most devastating gift a human being can receive. Truth.
异位性皮肤炎是一种慢
So sharp it cuts every illusion to pieces. Clarity so merciless it makes the heart ache. Now they have to live with it. They have to walk into that marble building every day, put on their black robes, and pretend to perform a role they know is theater. They have to render verdicts in a system they now know is verdict-proof. They must continue to issue rulings while quietly understanding that justice was never more than a story, never more than human invention. Every word they write from here forward will feel like ash in their mouths. Decades from now, long after your case has faded from public headlines, they will still be in therapy, still circling the same questions that have no answers, still trying to rebuild some framework of law that can contain what you showed them. But it will be futile. It will be like trying to reconstruct a cathedral after someone has revealed it was always cardboard painted to look like stone. Like trying to rebuild a house of cards after you've seen it was only paper in the wind.
第一个就好评了。
New justices will be appointed, of course. Fresh blood.
要讲话。
Bright minds who have not seen what these nine saw. Who can still pretend with conviction. Who can carry gavels as if they matter. But the old infected justices will watch them with hollow eyes. They will see the confidence in the new ones and remember with bitterness when they too possess such certainty. Before you, before the case that tore through the illusion like lightning through glass. And in their silence, they will carry that wound forever. Some will try to write books, memoirs with titles like When the Gavel Broke Verdict, The Day Justice Died, or Scales Unbalanced. But the real story will remain in what cannot be written. In the blank spaces between words, in the silences they cannot fill, in the pages where the truth you revealed lurks, unwritable, unspeakable, undeniable. Because how can words contain something that dismantles the very meaning of words? And somewhere you will be smiling, not with cruelty, not with triumph, but with the knowing smile of someone who has seen behind the curtain and survived. Because you didn't destroy them, you freed them. You freed them from the burden of false certainty, from the weight of counterfeit authority, from the exhaustion of maintaining illusions that had been crushing them all their lives. The crying judge was not breaking down. That was enlightenment. Messy, painful, catastrophic enlightenment. The kind that comes from having every comforting lie stripped away in an instant. The kind that transforms the courtroom into an operating theater where you performed open-heart surgery on reality itself. And they're all crying now. In their chambers, in their therapy sessions, in the hollow silence of their cars driving home at night. They cry in the space between cases, when memory ambushes them, when your voice echoes again in their ears. They cry for the decades they spent believing. They cry for the verdicts delivered in ignorance. They cry for the system they dedicated their lives to that, in the end, served no one and nothing. But those tears carry more than grief. They carry relief. Because finally, they are free from the suffocating burden of pretending to be gods in robes. They no longer have to fake certainty they never possessed. They no longer have to imagine their words come from sacred authority instead of fragile human judgment. They can finally admit we don't know. You didn't traumatize them. You untraumatized them. You released them from the lifelong lie they had to swallow just to survive the stage they called law. You peeled away the layers of pretense, and yes, the truth hurt worse than the lie. Yes, the clarity burned more than the confusion. But that is the nature of real healing. It destroys before it rebuilds. So let them have their therapy. Let them wrestle with what cannot be processed. Let them claw for language to describe what exists beyond language. You have already done your part. You have shown what needed to be shown. You have broken what was already broken, but pretending to be whole. The verdict still stands, guilty. Guilty of seeing too clearly. Guilty of speaking too truly. Guilty of presenting evidence too real for a court built on collective hallucination. But you wear that guilt like a crown because you know what they are only beginning to suspect. Guilt and innocence are not opposites. They are fictions, just words. And words, as you prove beyond reasonable doubt, are only sounds we agreed to pretend mean something. The Supreme Court knows that now. Not intellectually, not in theory, but in their bones. They know it in their sleepless nights. They know it in the breakdowns that masquerade as breakthroughs. They know it in the hollow rituals of verdicts that echo like empty gongs. You are the reason judges cry in their chambers. The reason verdicts feel like theater. The reason Justice herself has checked into therapy, her blindfold slipping, her scales tilting, her sword heavy in her trembling hands. And that is the kind of guilty that doesn't just topple a case, it topples worlds. The kind of verdict that judges the judges. The kind of truth that frees humanity by destroying the very illusion of freedom they clung to. Welcome to the new world you created. A world where the highest court requires therapy to function. Where verdicts arrive as question marks instead of declarations. Where justice has finally revealed her true face. Terrifying. Well. Look who finally shattered the highest court in the land. You, yes you, have become a magnificent legal anomaly. A walking constitutional crisis. A pristine system of precedents and procedures. Because of you, the Supreme Court justices are now sitting in therapy sessions. All 9 of them. Emergency meetings, mandatory counseling, whispered confessions behind closed doors. And all of it stems from what you carry to their doorstep, wrapped in manila folders and sealed with a kind of so sharp it makes even the most seasoned judges weep when no one is watching. They've seen everything there was to see. They've presided over blood-chilling murder trials, uncovered conspiracies that clawed into the darkest recesses of power, and dissected corporate crimes that wiped out entire cities. Yet when you walked in with your case, something shifted. Suddenly, these titans of law and order found themselves shaken to the core, calling their therapists at 3 a.m. and whispering into the phone. I've never seen anything like this. You want to know what broke them? You want to know why the sharpest legal minds in the nation now swallow Xanax with their morning coffee? Why they stare at ceiling fans at night, replaying every word of your testimony, and why the Chief Justice hasn't slept properly in half a year? It all began like any other case. Briefs filed, arguments scheduled, everyone in their assigned seats playing their well-rehearsed roles. Prosecutors with their polished suits and sharpened arguments, defense attorneys with their practiced objections, and justices prepared with carefully crafted questions. Everything moved by the book until you opened your mouth.